In 1955, two elderly sisters in Chicago, Mildred and Mary Meyer, reported in the Journal of Spaceflight their experiences with UFOs, including the recording of a radio program in which an unidentified code was allegedly heard. The sisters taped the program, and other ham radio operators also claimed to have heard the space message. The CIA's Office of Scientific Intelligence duly became interested and asked its Scientific Contact Branch to obtain a copy of the recording. Field officers from the Contact Division, one of whom was a man named DeWalt Walker, made contact with the Meyer sisters, who were thrilled that the government was interested, and set up a time to meet with them. In trying to secure the tape recording, the agency officers reported that they had stumbled upon a scene from arsenic and old lace. The only thing lacking was the elderberry wine, Walker Riley cabled headquarters. That's from Nick Redfern's book, On the Trail of the Saucer Spies, UFOs and Government Surveillance. It's an Anomalist Books publication. Hello and welcome to another edition of the Stench of Truth. I want to talk about two issues in the news. One is the suicide bombing of the Moscow subway, and one is the arrest of militia members in Michigan. First of all, because of the geopolitical strategy of the men behind Obama, I can only conclude with some degree of assurance on my own part, and I speak for myself here, that what happened in Moscow is definitely a controlled activity, a false flag operation, if you will, and probably run at the behest of the United States government through their various proxies and paid for through the black budget in order to put pressure on Russia and get them to toe the line, as it were, especially on the issue of Iran. What's tragic here is that we would still be engaged in such activities, but to deny the possibility is to deny the reality of the world that we live in today. And that is that we have covert operations, we have black budgets that are doing egregious things everywhere in the world. And this, I believe, is an example of that type of activity being run by our intelligence agencies through proxies in order to put the fear of God, as it were, into the Russians so that they toe the line on the quote-unquote war on terror, and to get them to back us on our pressure on Iran. We're also having activity against China as well, but this particular activity in Moscow is an escalation of the type of pressure and the type of activities that you would see in covert warfare scenarios that this government has perpetrated, is perpetrating, and will perpetrate. And the fact that this is being done now, the fact that this is being directed now by the people who are in power now, should be another nail in the coffin for those who continue to believe in the hope and change that you have with President Obama. If the health care bill, which is a bailout mandated on you for the insurance industry, didn't convince you, if his indefinite detention didn't convince you, if all of the other failures and backstabbing of this administration didn't convince you, then perhaps knowing that these types of activities are possible and are going on. Now remember, this is my opinion, a take on it from a geopolitical standpoint. I believe the Moscow suicide bombings were instigated, controlled, and operated from the United States. Now, as far as the arrests in Michigan, this is exactly the type of thing that we've seen before. I mean, it's like everything old is new again. Back in the 90s, we had a big militia brouhaha in this country. And it seemed like everybody who was anybody, you know, was forming militias, survivalist groups, you know, trying to start communities out in the wilderness, stockpiling food, guns, etc. And if you remember, if you have some memory, you know the culmination of what happened in that decade. We had Ruby Ridge, we had Waco, we had the Oklahoma City bombing, okay? The end result in all of these things, whenever the government decides that someone is not doing something the right way, or is engaging in activities that, you know, threaten whatever. You know, apparently these guys were threatening law enforcement people. They wanted to either lure a cop to his death and then attack the funeral for that cop. I don't know if this was just the ramblings of some, you know, backwoods hillbilly Christian group. And maybe they were just, you know, blabbing amongst themselves. You know, certainly what we saw with Ruby Ridge was an egregious example of overstepping the bounds for the FBI. The same thing with Waco. And certainly we didn't see any mass slaughter here, but this is just the beginning. This is just the beginning. And if the government starts a crackdown on these types of groups, all we're going to see is the same kind of conclusion. I'm not saying that people should be allowed to operate illegally if they're sitting out there, if they're actually planning, and they actually, you know, are doing something concrete to bring harm to somebody or somebody's property, then obviously there's a place for law enforcement in that. But at the same time, if we're just going to start picking and choosing our targets in this way and coming down on a particular type of people and a particular group or what have you that the government does, because when they went after Waco and whenever they went after Randy Weaver at Ruby Ridge, there were other, you know, groups, there were other people that they could equally have focused on, but they chose to pour a lot of time and energy and destruction into those activities. And that's what I'm afraid is going to happen here, that they're going to target specific groups and that they're going to go after the ones that they pick and choose they want to go after. Not particularly because they're the ones that are most dangerous in the sense of being an imminent threat to people or property somewhere, but because they hold beliefs that the government doesn't want people to have and that they want to suppress. That's my fear. So, just some food for thought on those two topics. Thank you. Good night.